Cap Rock is a short, gentle walk, just under half a mile, and it's rated easy. But with a guide, it becomes a window into the park's deeper stories. This area sits at the crossroads of two desert ecosystems, so you'll see a mix of Mojave plants like Joshua trees and pinyon pine, alongside hardy shrubs from the lower Colorado desert. Your guide will likely point out the geology that shaped these dramatic boulder stacks, as well as the birds, lizards, and desert plants that call them home. Let's follow our guide, Nicole, and uncover the layers that make Cap Rock such a special stop.
On this tour today, we're going to be talking about a variety of things that make Joshua Tree National Park special and how they all come together to create this landscape. So before we start walking, I want you guys to think about what you've seen so far here in Joshua Tree National Park. What part of this park, if you were to remove it in its entirety, do you think would completely alter the way you view this place? Joshua trees, yeah, that's a big one, right? Yeah, the park's namesake. How can Joshua Tree National Park be Joshua Tree without the Joshua tree? Anything else? The rocks, yeah, Joshua trees are super cool, but these rock formations are pretty dramatic for sure, so love the rocks. Anything else?
What's the name Joshua Tree come from?
Yeah, so the name Joshua Tree, actually, there's a lot of different things that people think of, but the most common one that we know was actually as Mormon settlers were coming through this area, they saw the Joshua Tree with all of its weird arms, and it looked to them like their prophet Joshua reaching up to the sky, and hence the name Joshua Tree was born. Yeah, great question. Bottom line here, though, is that there's so many different things that make Joshua Tree National Park special. And regardless of what thing you would have picked to remove, if you remove one thing from the landscape, it's ultimately going to have a negative effect on everything else. So this whole tour is talking about how everything is connected to create what you see here. And so to kind of really talk about how everything's connected, first I like to talk about the thing that came before anything else. Any guess from what you're seeing here, came before everything else? Water? Yeah, no, well, water definitely shapes the landscape, sure. From what you can see around you, what do you think came first? Wind, yeah, the earthquakes, and rocks, yeah, which all those answers are right because all of those things shape how the rocks came to be. But at the core, rocks are the oldest thing that we have here. In fact, the geological process that we now see up above started happening over 1 billion years ago, deep below the Earth's surface. Right, and it makes, now we have these two major types of rock formations that you see here in the park. And those two rock formations that we have are called the Pinto Gneiss and the Monzo Granite. And we'll dive a little bit more in depth, but first I want to talk about how they got up here to begin with. Well, for starters, about 280 million years ago, give or take, we have tectonic plates that are crashing into each other. Right, we have the Pacific plate, it's an oceanic plate, and then we have a North American plate. And think of like the oceanic plate for being like waterlogged, so it's a lot heavier. So when they smash into each other, the heavier plate sinks down below the lighter plate. And this process here is called subduction, right? And it's as it slides down below the North America plate, we get this friction, really intense friction. Think about like on a cold day today, like today, you might rub your hands together to get some warmth, right? But imagine that on a really extreme scale. So you have this really intense friction that's causing really intense heat. So now we already have deep underground this rock formation that currently exists, and now we have this intense heat that is now causing bubbles of magma to come up. So we have bubbles of magma coming up into the main rock formation and then cooling to create the magma domes that will eventually make the Monzo Granite like we see here today. And then over time, so we have the Pinto Gneiss and the Monzo Granite, and over time pressure brings everything to the surface. And the first thing that you're gonna see come to the surface is the Pinto Gneiss, which is the older formation, which is funny because a lot of times in geology, the older formation is below the newer one. But in our situation, the older formation is actually above it. In fact, when you look around all the different mountain ranges that we have here in Joshua Tree, we have 6 different mountain ranges. You can look out behind you and see that brown rock, or even, it's tucked away behind here, but yeah, all around you see this brown rock. That's called the Pinto Gneiss. So that is actually the older of the two formations. And then, of course, we have our magma domes, our cooled magma domes, which is the Monzo Granite, the famous rock that we know today. But these domes aren't perfectly rounded everywhere you go. And the reason for that is, now remember, this magma dome was within the Pinto Gneiss. So it's getting extreme pressure being located within a rock, another type of rock, and it's forming all these different types of cracks because of it. And then as it finally rises to the surface, right, Pinto Gneiss reveals itself first, and then as time goes on and we have erosion, the erosion takes away the Pinto Gneiss, revealing the Monza granite, but that also releases the pressure, kind of like a slinky or a spring, you know? And when you have that release of pressure, you have even more cracks. So you have cracks in every which way or another. I kind of like to think of it as like, if you have a sculpture and you're like pecking away at it, a lot of the rock formations that you see like out in the distance there that have a lot of smaller rock formations on it are like that starting process. And then as erosion happens over time and continues to polish it, that's when you'll get something like this, or like our famous cap rock. That now you have this really polished, the core of our rock formation. And that's a lot of geology talk, so I don't want to go dive too deep in, but there's one other thing that's really cool, and I'll have you guys kind of just start to walk with me over here. Let's come on down this way. I was hoping that we'd be able to see it, but I guess it's not good there. And we'll try not to stand here for too long and block the way, but this is like one of my favorite things to see here. So we'll just kind of stand here. This mountain here is called Ryan Mountain. And this is actually a really cool thing in geology because it's a contact point. So in a lot of places, I'm just telling you, yeah, there's the Pinto Gneiss, and within it, there's the Monza granite, and you just have to take my word for it because I'm a park ranger. But here is a prime example of what we call a contact point, somewhere where it's already happening. So we have that erosion starting to happen where the Monza granite is starting to be released, but there's still Pinto Gneiss above it. Now, in very far future, we'll all be dead, but the Monza granite will have completely revealed itself. The Pinto Gneiss will no longer be there. So it's kind of cool to think about the Monza granite that we see, all these famous rock formations that we know of, are really just the core of old mountain ranges. And eventually, at some point in time, we'll have even more of those rocks. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about that? Cool, so as we walk to our next stop, I want you to think about, so we talked about the geology a bit, right? And how things have been eroding for a very, very long time to reveal what we see here today. So I want you to think about, where does all of that erosion go? Where do all those small little bits of minerals go when it erodes away? And we'll walk and we'll talk about that at our next stop. Yeah, we have a nice large group. So we're gonna find a good place, hopefully, that we can kind of spread out. All right, so let me put this down because I have some things I want to show you anyway. Now, any guesses as to where all the eroded material goes? Yeah, exactly, yes, exactly. It goes right to the ground, which is really cool, because if you were to pick up a handful here, everything that you see here is just little smaller versions of the Monza granite that you see above you. Which is, so over time, while you have things that, you know, wind will take things from place to place, down into the valleys, over to the Salton Sea, a lot of it is right here at our feet. And the point I'm trying to make with that is that this eroded material, this soil, is the perfect place for our Joshua trees. In fact, they thrive in this rocky soil. So the fact that we have these rocks that erode away are the reason why we have the Joshua trees here in this area. And I like to talk, and I love the Joshua trees, obviously it's our park's namesake, but there's a lot of other really cool things about it. One of my favorite things about the Joshua tree, and let me get this here, let the anticipation kill you guys, is that Joshua trees are not actually trees at all. Joshua trees are just a giant type of yucca. They're part of the agave family. And this is a pretty big group, but I'll happily pass this around because I'll be talking for a minute. But just to kind of show you, I have this little tree cookie here. It would, you know, to show you that there are no tree rings. So I'll pass this around. Throw in a little funny story too. So back in the day, in the late 1800s, a guy came out here to the Joshua tree area before there was any protection, and he saw these trees, And he was like, you know what? No one's out here. I'm gonna make this into a killer lumber and paper company. And he puts so much money in it. He gets an investor from London involved. He starts this incredible business, right? Never cuts down one. And then he's like, all right, now it's time to start business. He cuts down his first Joshua tree, and he's like, oh crap, because they're not actually trees at all. So they're just a giant type of agave, which means they're made entirely up of fibers. So really terrible wood, terrible lumber altogether. But the point I'm trying to make with that is because they're not actually trees, they're actually pretty hard to age. We don't have tree rings to just guide the way. So we kind of give like a rough estimate based on the things that we know about Joshua trees and how they grow. For starters, Joshua trees grow about a 1/2 inch to 3 inches every year. It's a slow process. So it takes a really long time for them to get anywhere. And for the first 50 to 70 years of a Joshua tree's life, it's just growing straight up, kind of like a beanstalk. There's a great example of one like right there. Oh, there's one right behind me here. So they just go straight up for 50 to 70 years before they ever get their arms. And the reason being is it takes them 50 to 70 years to ever bloom. And every time a Joshua tree blooms, it gets another one of its funky arms. Now, with that being said, they should have a gazillion funky arms for if they bloom every year. The thing is that they don't bloom every year. There's certain requirements for the Joshua tree for it to properly bloom. For starters, a Joshua tree needs to experience a winter freeze. So that's not something that we actually get every year, which might feel surprising as we're all freezing here right now, but it doesn't happen every year. So one, Joshua trees have to have a winter freeze. And then secondly, the Joshua tree needs to be pollinated. Now, this is an interesting one because back during the Ice Age, the Joshua tree was has anyone here ever watched the movie Ice Age? You guys know Sid the Sloth? Yeah, yeah. So the Joshua tree was pollinated by none other than Sid the Sloth. The giant ground sloth was the critter that used to pollinate the Joshua tree. But has anybody seen any giant sloths around here? No, it would be really cool, maybe terrifying. But no, there's no giant sloths here anymore, which is pretty interesting. I can pass that around because that was the only thing that was pollinating them. But luckily we have this new introduction of the yucca moth. And this is really an ironic one to me because the giant sloth is, well, giant, and the yucca moth is one of the tiniest little critters around. To the point where it's really hard for us to even study them because they're so small and there's such limited ways for us to do our research. So now the only pollinator is the yucca moth. So you need a winter freeze and you need the yucca moth to actually pollinate the Joshua tree. This is what a Joshua tree bloom looks like, to just kind of give you an idea. You may have noticed that while you were driving through the park, that it looks like there are some blooms here in the park right now. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Joshua trees are not supposed to bloom right now. Yeah, Joshua trees are supposed to bloom in March, April. So the fact that they're blooming right now is actually not a good thing. It's exciting, because if this is your only time here to see it, and then you get to see a Joshua tree bloom, looking on the bright side. But at the end of the day, because they're blooming early, their friend, their pollinator, the yucca moth, is not here. The yucca moth is still underground. Yucca moth remains dormant until early spring when it can pollinate. So long story short, the blooms that you're seeing right now are just a waste of Joshua tree's energy. Not to say, oh, a Joshua tree blooms right now, so it's gonna die. But because Joshua trees already survive with such limited resources, any exertion of energy isn't a good thing. Any guesses as to why that's happening? Why we would be seeing earlier blooms? Yeah, exactly. So we're seeing more extreme weather events. So normally you need a winter freeze and a lot of rain for the Joshua tree to bloom. And right now we're getting like these weird one-off cold snaps, and we're getting a lot of rain. So it's tricking the Joshua tree into thinking that it's experiencing a spring climate when it's not. So we know that like the wonky arm system that they have is designed purposely to maximize their photosynthesis. So they're just pretty much getting as much surface area as they can. Why some of them are like, it's kind of like hard to judge for sure. We just know like more so about like surface area and less about like the directions in which they're going. Yeah, so what happens is, so after it blooms, and this is, you can kind of tell right here. So like one of these, anytime you see something that kind of looks like a dead stem on the end, that's going to be an old bloom. And it's just, it's kind of funny because a bloom is also considered damage. So once it's damaged, now it's trying to grow in different ways. So that will then split. So like that little branch will split into 2 directions to try to maximize its growth and survival. Yeah. Yeah, it's like a healing process. So yeah, like a Joshua tree has to be damaged in order for it to grow. They do have an extensive root system, so they can spread their roots out on like a surface area about 10 feet, give or take. That's why they all seem like to be perfectly planted in a way, right, away from each other. And then they also have a deep tap root that gives them access to groundwater. But of course, because of the way the desert is, there's not a lot of groundwater to get. So yes, they also will maximize the amount of water that they get when it rains. So they have a really widespread root system to try to get as much water as they possibly can. And then everything about the Joshua tree's goal is to maintain that water so it doesn't evaporate quickly. So as we walk to our next stop, I want you guys to think about, or I want you to really take a closer look around at the landscape. Because in the desert, it doesn't always feel like the most livable, hospitable place to be, right? So as we walk to our next stop, I want you guys to just take a closer look at your environment and look for different signs of life. And then we'll talk about that when we get to our next stop. Hoping that my next stop isn't in the shade. I'll try to move as quickly through it. I know, they're so cool. They get me every time I'm in the park. They really don't get old. Okay, so I had you guys thinking about or looking around at your environment while you were walking, looking for any signs of life. Did you guys notice anything? Like, any signs of life walking over here? Yeah, holes in the ground. Yeah, a lot of little critters that are underground. Lots of people. Yeah, we're a sign of life. Anything else? Yeah, so lots of plants, for sure. Anything else that we noticed? For sure, yeah. So, you know, I really like asking this one because it's actually feels like a pretty hard challenge for people to look for signs of life because it's hard. I mean, at first glance, life in the desert isn't obvious, right? But if you look closely enough, life in the desert starts to look a lot more like this. Yeah, you got tons of different things going on here. So there's so many things that call the desert home, even if we don't really notice it at first glance. And I like to emphasize that because a lot of the things that do utilize this area depend on the Joshua tree. And I have just a couple of quick images to show you. So I'll pass these around, but just kind of give you an idea of what you're looking at. So a variety of different critters utilize the Joshua tree and need it really for survival. One of the most obvious needs for the Joshua tree is it's used as a home. So a place for different things to nest, a place for protection. One of the most famous bonds is going to be with the Scott's oriole. It's this yellow bird that you'll see, and they form some really cool nests out of the actually old Joshua tree leaves within the Joshua tree. So its double usage is really cool. We also have the mourning dove. So while the Scott's oriole is like the famous bird that everyone thinks about when they think about nesting in Joshua trees, a wide variety of birds use it. In fact, other critters like bobcats have even been spotted up in Joshua trees hanging out. So a variety of different things will actually use it as a home base or protection. And then other critters like and I'll just pass these around and then I'll talk about them. I'll give one this way and one this one. And then other critters like the ladderback woodpecker, which you'll see a lot here. I was never really a big birder till I got here, and here it's so cool to see. The ladderback woodpecker you'll see all throughout the park if you look close enough, and they will peck into more of the damaged Joshua trees or down Joshua trees to make nest cavities, which then they'll of course utilize, and then once they're done, a variety of other birds will also get to utilize. And even when a Joshua tree dies, it's still very useful because things like the desert night lizard actually live under this Joshua tree. In fact, if we all work together, which we won't, to pick up the Joshua tree, we would probably find 100 little desert night lizards, which at one point had been known for being the smallest lizard in the world. But recently a smaller lizard in the Caribbean was found, so now we can't call him that. But we'll say he's the smallest lizard in North America, which is still pretty cool. So a whole bunch of them live under here. So one, we're using it, Joshua trees are used as a home base. And then of course they're also used for food. So like I mentioned, the desert lizard lives underneath the deadened down Joshua tree, and he lives under there because there's also a bunch of termites under the Joshua tree. So the desert night lizard lives its entire life under a Joshua tree without ever having to leave it. That's also partly why it gets its name, desert night lizard, because if you were to pick up a Joshua tree and that lizard were to be exposed to the sun, it would just freeze and not move at all until you put it back into darkness. And then of course, while I talked about all the little critters that live in the Joshua tree, well, predators have gotten pretty knowledgeable about that. So things like one of the pictures that's going around is of a gopher snake that was found in a Joshua tree, actually looking for birds' eggs. So that'll happen. Or like kit foxes and bobcats will know to go into the Joshua trees as well. And then of course, while we talked earlier about blooms and those seeds that would be dispersed normally, it's not every single seed that will eventually make a Joshua tree, a new Joshua tree, because a lot of other critters enjoy eating the seeds, like the mule deer and the rabbits and the wood rats. So every part of the Joshua tree is utilized by some sort of critter. If we think outside of critters and think about the plants that you guys mentioned, what the Joshua tree also does is you'll notice around the bases of Joshua trees, you have a wide variety of other plants, right? Because the Joshua tree's leaves, when they fall, they decompose and they actually enrich the soil. So that soil enrichment will also harbor life for new plant life. So long story short, Joshua tree is a keystone species, which means everything in this ecosystem really depends on the Joshua tree to be here. Even people like you and me, a lot of us today may have come out specifically to see the Joshua trees, right? And that's really important because we also play an incredibly important role in the protection of this national park. So as we walk to our last stop, I want you guys to think about, what role do we play in protecting this? How are we connected to everything else? All right, so we've talked about how all these different things in the park are connected and work together, right? From the rocks to the Joshua trees to the wildlife, everything has a purpose here. Where do we fit into that? What role do you think we have in protecting this place?
Don't leave any trash, leave as little trace as possible.
Yeah, 100%. Leave no trace while you're here, for sure. Anything else? That's a really good one. Yeah, use fire responsibly, especially making sure if you're having a fire, it's always in a designated fire ring at a campground, in a time of year when you're allowed to have them, 100%, because fire does spread here for sure. Anything else? Cool, well, all of those are really great answers. And the bottom line is, well, everything that we do here is going to have an effect on the environment, and we can have a really positive effect. In fact, the whole purpose, the whole way that national parks were even established in the first place are because of people like you and me who came out to a place like this and thought it was so beautiful that they thought it needed to be protected. And Joshua Tree National Park in particular is a really great example of that, because we have someone named Minerva Hoyt who did exactly that. So back in the 1920s, this area was finally starting to get a tourism boom. People from Los Angeles who really had never come out to the desert finally had access to the automobile. And they take their cars and they drive out to the desert to see something that they've never seen before. And they came out here to see it because they thought it was beautiful. And so they come out here, they're admiring the landscape, but they also want to take a little bit of the landscape home with them. So what do when they're out here? Well, they start to take things with them. They start digging up Joshua trees and barrel cactuses, which I don't even know how you could get one safely without hurting yourself. So they start digging up things in the landscape. Some people even go as far as a common pastime back then was just setting a Joshua tree on fire just to see what it would look like. So you have all these like negative effects happening, and even the people who were here who were really just coming initially to enjoy Joshua tree or to see the area, and then deciding by seeing others to take something home with them, even if it was unintentional, they were slowly altering the landscape. And then this woman named Minerva Hoyt steps in. Minerva Hoyt's actually from Mississippi, so she didn't even spend her whole life in this area. She doesn't get to this region until she's in her 30s. So she gets here in her 30s, and unfortunately her husband and her son both pass away suddenly. And she goes out into nature to enjoy nature's therapy. And she finds refuge in places like what would eventually become Joshua Tree National Park. And she sees firsthand what's happening to some of her favorite places. One great example of it is Devil's Garden. Devil's Garden, it's something that it's not really talked about now, but if you drive to Palm Springs from here, if you've been there already or if you're going there, pay attention to the wind turbines. If you see all those wind turbines in that area, that was Devil's Garden. That area used to be incredibly lush with a wide range of cactus and vegetation that was slowly destroyed because of people coming in and taking things. So she sees that happening to one of her favorite places, and she knows that she has to put a stop to it. And she starts on her 10-year campaign. It takes her 10 years to finally protect this place, but she's making it her mission. So she goes out there, she goes to New York, Boston, London, and she's showing all these people how special the desert truly is. And eventually, it all pays off. And in 1936, Joshua Tree National Monument is established, and this area finally gets the protection that it deserves. Funny enough, it doesn't become a national park until 1994. So it's a long gap, right, between the monument and the actual national park protection, which is crazy because if it hadn't been for Minerva Hoyt fighting, just someone from Mississippi who wasn't even born and raised here, but came out here and fell in love with it, if it hadn't been for her fighting for what she believed in and what she cared for, who knows if by 1994 there would have been any Joshua Tree National Park to protect. Yeah, exactly. And that's a scary thought, but it's true. And I really think, I love talking about Minerva Hoyt because I think she's a really great representation of what we can do when we put our mind to it. You know, it's awesome. It's so awesome to see so many people out here today, out experiencing Joshua Tree National Park from all over the country, all over the world even, coming out to enjoy these places. But as there are so many people here, it's also really important to remember, while it's great that we're out here being passionate about the resource, how we interact with the resource will also decide whether that resource will still be here for future generations, right? So it's a combination of things, but the grand scheme of things is remember that everything in the park is connected, and we're a part of that. So regardless of how you interact with the park, just remember that our footprint matters. Thank you so much for coming to my tour today. Let me know if you have any questions at all. I'm gonna set you free here, so thank you.